right, System 333 on air. Today we have a very special guest, my good friend Steve. We caught up in New York about 3 years ago, back in 2017. Fun day when we went to the Statue of Liberty. And then in 2019, in August, when I was visiting some of the former Soviet countries, Steve and I caught up again in Belarus, in Minsk, the capital. And Steve has been back and forth between America and Belarus. He's lived a very interesting life in these times during the pandemic and has got a lot of perspective to share today. I want to welcome you all to the show, Steve. How you going?
Good. How you doing today, Zach?
Yeah, pretty good. Early in the morning, so, always up, early riser. Good to start the day for a podcast. What time is it over there right now for you?
It is 11:15 or approximately over here right now.
Okay, yeah, late at there, 9 hours. I think it's 9 hours behind. Is that right? Something like that.
Yeah, you guys are ahead of us.
8 hours.
So
8 hours behind.
Yeah, so it's basically the same difference between me and you as me and America here. So kind of halfway between.
Because America is 8 hours behind Belarus, Minsk, New York. Is that right?
Yeah. New York is 8 hours behind us.
Far out. Sometimes you
7,
really
8
wonder.
hours, depending on if they change the daylight savings times goes into effect or not.
Yeah, it makes you realize time's a bit of an illusion sometimes, like we're talking in different time zones, and then there's all that time difference between even your place of your place of residence in America. So today, we got a lot of interesting topics to discuss. Actually, as you could see, some of the viewers will be wondering why Steve's screen's red. I guess we don't know why. Maybe it's because he's in a Soviet country. It's red just by.
I don't think I've ever seen it do that before. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like you're in the Soviet country, so just reinforcing the colors. We're talking about some of the Soviet colors in the house. How they actually make the colors of the walls inside the house like that dark pink and shit.
This one actually isn't too bad. This apartment that I'm in right now, that we've been renting, it doesn't have any really weird colors in it. Because I was kind of against. I told my girlfriend, don't get anything too weird when we were looking at places to rent. And this one's got the room I'm in right now just has kind of off-white beige walls in it with some like beige wallpaper. So, but some of these apartments, yeah, they're all like bright blue and crap pink on the inside.
For those of you that have not been into inside Soviet apartments, Steve and I were discussing the other day that because for most of the year it's so bleak when it comes to the weather, grey skies, going outdoors. What a lot of the people in the Soviet Union who were living there during that time were doing was painting the inside of their houses all these strange different colors to give themselves a bit of variance in what they were looking at. They can't be looking at grey and white and black all day, right?
No, yeah, I think that you walk outside and you see that it's kind of a dismal environment out there, especially with the architecture they added. The weather isn't that much different than upstate New York from here, but a lot of the old Soviet architecture, especially the stuff that was built when they still had the Soviet Union, was like very bleak gray. They used a lot of mostly concrete buildings and everything, and they didn't do a lot to paint the outsides or anything. Although they have changed some things, like where you'll see like the newer buildings, they kind of make a habit of painting them in bright colors. A lot of the newer buildings, so you'll drive by and you'll see like the newer buildings are like green or like a reddish pink color or like blue, bright blue. It's kind of like, but it kind of makes it feel like it's going over the top, because when you see those buildings, then like a couple buildings over, you see the gray old monolithic Soviet buildings. Like really makes it look kind of strange. And over here versus America, the thing that I talked about this with my girlfriend a bunch of times is like the people buy these apartments, and the buildings are owned by the government, but the people own the apartments inside the buildings, but there are no like HOAs or building management organizations set up.
No strata.
Yeah, so none of the public areas are maintained well, because the only people maintaining them would be the government, and the government's not going to, since there's not the only money the government's getting is the tax money, so nobody's paying to upkeep the sidewalks or the paint on the outside or anything. So a lot of them kind of dilapidate over time, where you'll see this building and it looks terrible on the outside. But the building I'm in right now is kind of like that. Where on the outside it looks like, oh my God, I don't want to live there. But then you come in here, and the stairwells and stuff look pretty bad too. But then you go into the actual apartments, and people have they keep their apartments like pristine, like renovated and everything. A lot of them are renovated with like modern, I've seen stuff here that I haven't seen in America as far as like some cool stuff they've done with the bathrooms and the floors and stuff. But the exterior, nobody really does anything with it very
You know
often.
what?
So
That totally makes sense. Because look, when I got stuck in that abandoned, it was semi-abandoned, because someone was actually living there, but you just wouldn't know. But um, in Russia, when I first arrived in St. Petersburg in my first hour, it was pretty much the way you described it. Bleak building, a bit of color on the outside, but it was still very bleak. You go in, you go up the staircase, it's just really poorly. It's like it hadn't been maintained for 40 years or 50
yeah, it's
years.
all like dusty, grimy. Hasn't been painted in like probably 30 or 40 years. Not like maintained on a regular basis. And then you go into somebody's apartment and they might have like brand new tile floors and all like new kitchen cabinets and everything, or maybe it's not even new, but they've done a great job maintaining it. And this stuff is usually the insides of people's apartments are kept really clean and everything, especially when I think about because Americans have the habit of not taking their shoes off when they go into their house. So that's kind of something that the rest of the world always thinks is weird. Most other countries, people take their shoes off right at the front door. Um, and the Soviets definitely, or the Slavic countries, they definitely continue that tradition. Whereas in America, people are a little bit more lax on that. Some people still enforce it, but some people don't. So they say Americans tend to spread the dirt around their houses a bit more, which means we have to clean them more often. But yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
you know
some of these
what?
apartments.
You know what? I never thought about that really, where that taking the shoes off, like that's something they do in Kashmir as well. But you're right. You're walking around everywhere in your Air Maxes or whatever, and you've been just gone for a walk down the park, and you're doing walking around your own house in those shoes. I can imagine, yeah, definitely a lot of filth, a lot of grime. Um, so moving into just Soviet living. Okay, so for the viewers, for those of you that want to know why Steve has had a very dynamic life in the last year. So I caught up with you in August 2019. You're in Belarus. You were there with your girlfriend at the time. Then I went back to Sydney, and then sadly your father passed away, and you had to go back to America, to New York. Was that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That was I saw you. I think it was in August of last
August
year.
2019. When did you go back
And
to
then I
US?
actually, yeah, and then I actually met up right after you left. I met up with remember that I told you about this, the guy who used to run the MGTOW
101.
101. Yeah, he is the Men 101 channel on YouTube now, and he was here for a couple of weeks, and I actually I was with him hung out with him probably about half a dozen times. We went out and a few times to a few different clubs around here, and talked about. I'm still in contact with him. He's in Mexico right now with his girlfriend. But anyway, yeah. Then my father passed away at the end of October, and I had to rush back to the U.S. It is really though incredible if you think about it, how 100 years ago, my ancestors that came to America 120 years ago would be on a boat for 2 weeks, and I was, after my father passed away, I was back in the United States within 36 hours. So,
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's really quick. And then you were there, obviously you had a lot of things to do for the family. You had your girlfriend that you left in Belarus to go and attend to family matters. And then in early 2020 or late 2019 for New York, the pandemic hit. What was going through your mind? Because I mean, really, you didn't intend to go back to US. Prior to your father passing, I don't think I think you were going to stay in Belarus that whole time. Because was that correct?
I was going to stay at least until like mid 2020. I didn't plan on leaving for like another 8 months or so, and then I had to leave early because of that. Um, I think I was speaking with you when the whole pandemic thing started. I remember I was talking to few mutual friends of ours, and we were talking about seeing it coming up in China, and it really was like, well, it's spreading fast, and they say it's going to be bad, and I was like, well, let's see, what happens, and I didn't think it was going to. When it started getting to the U.S., I was like, well, they're gonna make a big deal out of it once it got to the U.S. I knew that, but I didn't think it was going to be still be as what it turned out to be. I didn't think it would be as long lasting and as like they would turn it into this entire reason to basically lock down the entire, or not the entire, but almost the entire global population of a lot of the industrialized countries. is what it's been used as, kind of, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, and with that being said, so you came back to Belarus. When did you go back to Belarus this year?
I
What
got
month?
back here in the middle of September.
Okay, yeah, not so about 2, 3 months now. So for a
Yeah.
majority of the bulk of the pandemic, you were in New York. You saw a lot of shit go down, and then you went to Belarus. And I mean, we've had we've had Nick Zykov on the podcast from Belarus earlier on. He's actually will be coming on again. He's given me a lot of a lot of stories about what's been going on. What
Yeah.
experience have you seen between the two countries, going from New York over to Belarus? How is that giving you the perspective on what is really happening with this pandemic, Steve?
Um, when I when the whole pandemic thing started when I was in the U.S., I was planning to fly my girlfriend there to spend some time with me in the U.S. while because I basically I moved into my father's old house and I was maintaining it and helping you know move a lot of the old stuff from that I had actually kept there myself from my old belongings, but also just the general stuff that had built up over my family's history and everything. Getting rid of it and deciding what we're going to keep, what we're going to sell, what we're going to throw away, getting the house ready to sell. So I flew my girlfriend over there to because I was going to be there for several months. I knew that when it happened. So it was relatively easy to get her over there in the first place. She thought it was going to be a big problem with the visa. It wasn't really that big of an issue. Got her the visa, flew her over to the U.S. The issue was getting her back out when she got there because she came in mid-February, and by the end of the first week in March, so she'd only been there for like about 2 weeks when this happened. When they started shutting everything down in the U.S., like within about 2 weeks, everything had started.
It was the beginning
And
of
then,
March that things really just
yeah.
became completely closed, eh?
Oh, what's going on with this girl? Hold on a second. All right. So then they started canceling all the flights. So her flight back, she was because she had to fly back through I think Austria. Western Europe completely shut down, so she couldn't fly back because they shut down. They canceled all those flights that were going through Western Europe. So then I booked her a flight to fly through Moscow, and at the end of March, beginning of April, she was supposed to fly back on April 4th, and about March 28th, Russia closed its borders.
Hmm.
So they canceled her flight back through Russia. She was going to fly through Moscow to get to Belarus, and they canceled that. So she was all crying and upset. I ended up having to call the Belarusian embassy, and they told us to fly her through Amsterdam because KLM and what's the German airline, Lufthansa or something? Yeah, they were still flying Lufthansa and KLM.
Lufthansa, yeah.
Yeah, it was a big pain in the ass, but I got her back. So she leaves, and it was actually about a week or two after that she left. I think I might have got the coronavirus. I don't even know yet because I never got tested for it. But you got to realize I'm like 36 years old at the time, and I'm only 37 now. But it's like I guess like if you're young or you're in decent shape, you're taking like vitamins, taking decent care of your health, you can get the coronavirus and it really won't bother you. Because the only reason I think I got it was because a few days in April, I noticed I got like a really sore and tender like thyroid gland, like right around here in my neck, and it was like just to touch it was really sore and tender. So I was like, well, why does that happen? That's never happened to me before in my life. And I go along looking it up, and it's like, well, and then one of the things that causes it, there's only like two things that cause it. One is like thyroid disease. I don't have that. And the other is like you're recovering from a viral infection. And I was like, well, what the hell? I didn't really get sick. So, and then I was like, well, it could have been the coronavirus. But anyway, so everything was locked down in the US from March until like May, June, really heavily, especially in New York. And then in like May and June, they started opening some things up slowly in New York for like the summer, the spring, summer. And the problem is that a lot of the other states had locked down prematurely. They didn't have a lot of cases, and they locked down because they saw what was going on in New York. They didn't want to spread it, so they all locked down. They weren't getting a lot of cases, so they started opening up as New York was opening up, and then though they started having a resurgence in a lot of those other states. So it was all being in the United States. You know how it's run over there with the federal government, the state governments, and the city governments. Well, the state governments have a lot of power. They're almost like little countries themselves. So it was up to the state governors what lockdowns they wanted to impose in their states. And the other states besides New York ended up having to lock down again, and it was like going back and forth where you see like some states were trying to reopen and they'd have to close again, and some states decided not to reopen, and then like it was all a real big strange thing. But they had the grocery stores. It was very early on that New York State started mandating that everyone wear masks in any store they go to. But as far as the enforcement of this was concerned, there were no like fines like imposed upon individual people in regards to them not wearing masks if they weren't wearing them. But a lot of the stores, the bars, and this is particularly the small businesses, were getting fined and closed down because they weren't following the whole social distancing guidelines and the mask, enforcing the mask on their patrons. One place I actually went to, a bar, when I was there on a Sunday with my friend in New York. We went there. I only see him like every few months, even when I'm in New York. I didn't see him very often. But we went to a bar on a Sunday. The Tuesday following that Sunday, he sends me a link on an article of the local newspaper. They closed down that bar we were at because apparently while me and him were there that Sunday, there were health inspectors there, undercover health inspectors from the state of New York. And they saw that people were sitting at tables close to each other, not wearing masks. There was no social distancing guidelines being followed or mask wearing. So they closed down that bar. I mean, really the whole thing. And I talked to a few other small business owners in New York, like one who owned an ice cream shop, one who owned the guy who owned the bar. People I knew that, from growing up and living there my entire life, that are seriously angry about the whole thing.
Do you think small business owners are being crushed? Like, do you feel like that they're just, I mean, look, a lot of the similar stuff happened here in Australia, like from what you were saying. But do you feel like this is, if anybody's really come out of this, scathed, it's small business owners, especially in hospitality and restaurants all over the world?
Some people believe that this is sort of like the next phase of this. This is like a part of a scheme, a conspiracy by the global elites to progress their global financial reset agenda or whatever, because they're trying to, Amazon, Walmart, Netflix, a lot of the online and major retailers, including Walmart, which isn't really, they are online, but they're mostly known for their massive stores. They've had record profits during this whole thing because people have been forced away from the local mom and pop grocery store, the restaurants, and they're being pushed into the large supermarkets, chain stores, and online stores out of necessity to buy what they need to survive. And it's definitely the small businesses that have just been hammered by this whole thing. Meanwhile, it's not all of the large corporations that are doing well in America. Some of them have been hurt by the whole thing. I mean, obviously, if people can't go to the movies, I mean, the entertainment industry in Hollywood has been getting hammered badly too. I mean, you can't even go to a movie. It's like they delayed all the releases of all the new movies. Like, there hasn't been like a new like Hollywood film, I mean, major one that's come out since like February, and it's like,
it's a long time.
That
has been strange in that regard.
Actors and actresses, but the cameramen, the agents, everybody who's working to support those industries is getting screwed too. Not the multi-million-dollar, not Brad Pitt and like Tom Cruise, whatever. Okay, they got $50 million. They'll be able to ride it out, but a lot of the other people are definitely getting hammered there. So anyway, though, locally in a lot of the smaller communities in America, it's really screwing things up. I mean, I've heard a lot of people talking about the suicide rates going up. Some of these small business owners, I was watching an interview earlier today on Fox News about a meeting of small business owners that happened in Western New York. And they were talking about how they were complaining at the meeting and the police showed up and they were yelling at the police saying like, listen, we need to talk about how we can keep our businesses afloat. I have friends who committed suicide because their businesses went under and everything.
That's unbelievable. So what type of businesses were they running? Like, I mean, we know that primarily hospitality, events, all that really affected. You said you had a friend who'd,
about what businesses are affected?
Business was that?
I was having an argument / discussion with my girlfriend about this last week because she couldn't understand how I was talking to her about how, I'm thinking about buying a piece of real estate over here, either an apartment or a house. It'll probably end up being an apartment. I'm not sure yet though. But anyway, I was talking about how I was going to wait because I think that the real estate market in the U.S. might collapse or go at least see a substantial reduction in 2021. Even though it's been booming outside the cities right now because people are trying to get out of the cities in the U.S. right now. I don't know if you know about
I
that,
didn't
but
know
people
that.
are.
No, I didn't know that. What was
Yeah,
this?
there's mass. I
Is
mean,
this just in New York State, or all over the country?
no. I mean, New York, California, Chicago, Miami, Dallas, Houston, all the big cities, basically.
So the price of property outside the city and towns are
The price
rising.
of property in suburban areas and rural areas for homes and condos in suburban and rural areas has skyrocketed
Wow, I didn't know
considerably.
that. That's crazy.
Yeah,
And
people,
okay,
almost 500,000 people left the city of New York between when the whole lockdown started in June. So,
because
like
they all
March
just
to
wanted to
June,
get out of there. Let's get out of the fucking city.
you got
Let's not get the
social
metro
unrest.
anymore. Let's go to a place where we can have a, be far away from a high population as possible and live in a large living space.
Yeah, well, you've got social unrest. You've got the fact that a lot of these, especially the high tech and you can't do it. I would say medical field would be like an elite, like a professional level of work. In the medical field, you can't do that remotely. But lawyers to some extent, accountants, um, IT people, engineers, financial people, they can work online, and they have been for months. A lot of them, and they don't need to be located in New York City. So they're getting away from the social unrest caused by the lockdown, the political unrest, everything that's going on with BLM and Antifa and the whole politics of the U.S. Um, and then all these, I mean, when you're in a city and having to deal with the restrictions of the lockdown is a lot more stringent than when you're living outside in the country and your contact with other people is so limited. You don't have to worry about wearing a mask when you go walk outside your house because there's nobody around. You don't have to worry so much about social distancing when your nearest neighbor is, I don't know, 600 feet away or something in the house,
Yeah,
and you
I
have like
feel like
a
what
wall
people
between
wanted
you.
to do is if they had the money, they took matters into their own hands to get themselves out of the pandemic while they still could.
Yeah, people who have the money are kind of getting out of there, and the whole thing is the people who own the businesses, though, the small business owners that have been. I mean, you got pretty much every small business is being affected, but I think it's mostly the businesses that are unnecessary spending, so to speak. Like bars,
Overextending their.
nightclubs, restaurants are getting destroyed. Like diners. I going to diners and going out to eat at a diner is like a small restaurant in New York, kind of like a local place usually. Um, they they're only allowed to have 50% capacity because they can only allow you have to allow a certain number of distance between anybody who's sitting there and eating. But really, it's like they're down to like 20% capacity. So it's like the ones that are open, you go to them and it's like the place is basically empty. And then you have
So
to, everyone's wearing the mask and everything. It's all like
like a mass apocalypse of businesses, which look happened in
it's
Australia as well. Happened
really
severely
dismal.
in Victoria, in Melbourne. I'm going to be heading to Melbourne soon. In I guess within the week, I'll be over there. And it's going to be interesting to see what happened in that regard. I mean, it happened in Sydney as well. I would say in my experience, I was going to work every day through the city, so I had to work at home for about 2 months or so. Once I returned from the lockdown that they had in Sydney to return to the office, um, all the shops. No, I won't say all the shops. I would say, yeah, what you said, 50% of the shops that I used to go to, cafes, bars, restaurants, all shut. It was absolutely insane. In fact, I remember there was one time it really hit me was when I went out for lunch. Actually, just went out to get a coffee, and all the main places that we used to frequent to get our coffee and food were all closed. All closed by they only maybe did trading for about 2 3 hours in the morning, and then they shut because by midday nobody's walking around. It's only your early birds up there going to go work in their office, and that's it. There was not the mass influx of uni students, of office workers. You see abandoned office buildings. It's the same type of thing. But
Yeah.
I guess Sydney bounced back um, a lot quicker, which was good. But yeah, Melbourne definitely copped it hard. Um, now have coming from America and seeing this, what you just explained, all these businesses affected. and now then going into Minsk in Belarus, Steve. What was your experience of the pandemic in Belarus, and especially with the protest? Um, and the president and everything that's going on. How has your human experience changed going from US, New York to Belarus during this pandemic?
So when I got to Belarus, and I knew this from being in contact with my girlfriend, they didn't do any shutdown at all here, and
I
that was
locked down.
still no lockdown. They didn't close down any businesses at all. They weren't requiring people to wear masks in public. There was they had, like, if you go into like the metro or like some of the stores, not all of them, but some of them. And this is back when I got here. They had the tape on the ground for the social distancing to kind of show people where they should stand. But nobody was really following it, and nobody was wearing. I mean, there were some people wearing masks. Like probably about 5% of the people you would see out in the streets would be wearing masks in public. But no business, no limited hours on businesses like it's still going on in America, where everything is closing at everything is. They've opened a lot of stuff up now, but everything is required to close at 10 p.m. You know, that's just how it is. None of that was going on here, and just 2 weeks ago, the president implemented that everyone has to wear masks now in public when you're in like a store or anything, or using a public service. And he's actually imposed some pretty strict fines with that on individual people.
Lukashenko, Alexander
Yeah.
Lukashenko.
I don't know. He says this whole plan. He has come out and said like the whole pandemic thing is a power. It's being used as a power grab by
Western
some of the global elites. Yeah, Alexander Lukashenko. Lukashenko, depending on in Russian, it's Lukashenka. In English, you probably pronounce it Lukashenko. So,
Yeah, look,
anyway,
a lot of people say he's the last European dictator. I've spoken to locals. What do you think of the whole situation with the protest and the riots that have happened? From being a non-Belarusian living in Belarus, what is your perspective,
didn't you
especially
have a
in America?
didn't you have a Belarusian on this podcast a few weeks ago or something like it?
Yeah,
You were
I
talking
did. Yeah,
about it.
Nick, and he'll be on again. Um,
I mean, to
oh,
be quite honest, I have no real stake in the game. I'm not from here. I've lived here for about a year and a half, collectively now. Um, I mean, I understand there are the grievances that they have probably with the economic system here, because there are some things about this place that are really strange as far as the way the economy works. Um, but if you look at Belarus's GDP performance for the last few years, I believe it has been rising.
mhm.
Uh, Not tremendously, but it has been growing consistently. And because he didn't do a lockdown here, I think that maybe the economy here, when the books are closed at the end of the year, might on paper have performed better than the economies in a lot of the more wealthy industrial nations, on a relative level, because he didn't go crazy with the lockdowns and just lock and shut everything out. He himself, it is kind of when you challenge the upper levels of power here, it is a police state, in that sense. From, you know, you shouldn't be, messing with the power structure that exists here, and that is Alexander Lukashenko. But as compared to, I don't, you can say he's like the last dictator of Europe. What about Vladimir Putin? And the thing
Yeah,
about
that's
Russia,
if people. Yeah, I mean, Russia, I guess, on a very well, it is. I don't know if it's geographically subjective or mathematically objective, but some would say Russia is a fusion of Asia and Europe because we've both been to Yekaterinburg. There's the border, Asia and Europe. Russia is not just the president of the.
so you don't want to necessarily consider Russia part of Europe. I
Well,
can understand
I
that.
remember. I'll never forget now. There was a woman that I met from France. She was, looked like some type of supermodel or something. This was in Sydney, and part. She didn't tell me she was French straight away. She wanted me to guess her race, and I thought she might have been Russian because there's a lot of French Russian.
Yeah.
And she was like, Russia is not Europe. Russia is Russia. He goes, you think Russia is in Europe? And I pulled out the fucking photo of me on the border of Asia and Europe, and I'm like, Europa, Asia. Russia is both Asia and Europe. It's not. People could say Russia and Russia. People could say Russia is Europe. People could say Russia is Asia. From what I know, Russia is a country that covers both continents, and that's what makes it unique compared to other countries.
Yes, geographically, yeah, it's definitely probably more of it's in Asia. But the thing is, ethnically and culturally, it's more European. Although it
Definitely,
does
yeah,
have,
because it's Balkan Slav gene mostly, and
yes, yeah,
Slavic language.
there are a lot of people, from the Tatar ethnicity and Kazakhs and Tajikistan, people who are living in Russia, but predominantly, especially Western Russia and even parts of Eastern Russia, are mostly European descent people, culturally and ethnically. But anyway, we're getting drawn off to that hole. That's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down with all that stuff.
But yeah,
But
yeah, no, that's very important because people do want to consider when they look at these former Soviet countries or current Soviet countries, however you want to frame it, they do want to get a bit of an understanding of how the dynamics work. I mean, you and I have been through these countries, Russia, Belarus. You've been to Ukraine too, haven't you?
yeah, I've been there. Yep.
Yeah, you've been to
I was,
Ukraine.
2 years ago. I went to Ukraine.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess you and I are like Westerners that have traveled those parts of the world quite, and you've lived there quite comprehensively. We haven't just gone to like the Russian FIFA World Cup or for like a Kentucky tour there for like a week. We actually got in, immersed with the culture. Um, we learnt the language. I know you've made more of a, I guess, a conscious effort to do that. Having gone to Russian school there in Belarus, Steve. So it's quite.
Technically, still learning. Yeah.
I mean, I learnt Russian. People ask me how the fuck I learnt Russian. Thankfully, being Greek, half the alphabet's the same. So to adapt
Yeah.
to adapt to the Russian language wasn't a big task. In fact, I find Russian easier than Greek because Greek has way too many different words for one word, and that pissed me off. Like it gets fucking annoying. So Russian, even the alphabets are more simple. It's just easier to identify sounds. So what's your experience been? Having come into Belarus now, learning Russian. What's your experience been learning Russian in Belarus now? Have you felt like you could pick up the language a lot more easily living there? That's always something that I've really tried to figure out because I feel like my Russian picks up really well when I'm in those countries, but as soon as I go back to Australia, I barely use it. How have you felt your language development evolved?
Well, before I talk about that, I want to bring up the one thing that I didn't get to finish about talking about Russia and Belarus. But like in Russia, the thing about like people here are protesting, they want to get Lukashenko because they think they get another president, it's going to be any better. It depends on who the president is and what the dynamics of the country are going forward. Um, I mean, the thing about Lukashenko, he keeps this country running pretty smoothly and it's clean. You know,
It's super clean. By the way, it is one of the cleanest
there's
countries
no
I've ever been to. Out of all the, I don't know how many, I've been to over 40 places, 40 countries in the world. Belarus was one of the cleanest. Almost as clean as Taiwan, Japan. We were talking that clean, from what I remember, Steve, when we were walking around.
it's clean. It's clean. It's not the most modern, but it's well
Doesn't have to
maintained.
be. Doesn't
And
have to be modern. It's really
there's a
not.
relatively low crime rate here. You know what I mean? Like there's not as much street level crime here. You don't have to worry about being mugged. Where I speak to people from Russia and stuff, and it's more. I've never had any issues in Russia either, but there is more like people bothering you on the streets, begging you for money or
Always got to ask for cigarettes,
trying to get
but
you
at
to
least
buy
they're only a
something
dollar, two
nonsense
dollars.
in Russia. Here, I don't get it as much. It depends on where I go here in Belarus, but I mean, sometimes you go to some place and the gypsies are there and they try to get stuff from you, but in Russia, it's more common than here. And, and I think that the Belarusian people, yeah, things aren't great. The economy, they're poorer than Poland and Latvia and Lithuania, and the EU countries in general. But they're making about as much money as Russians, and they don't have to deal with as much. The roads in Russia suck. In Belarus, they're a lot better. The metro systems, the way the city itself functions here is a lot smoother than a lot of the stuff in Russia. Still a lot of bureaucracy, but at least it's a little more organized and the way it is here, and there's less bullshit to deal with from just the general people because they do harshly punish people for nonsense crimes here. They do. I mean, not nonsense crimes. I mean, like theft and you could if you steal somebody's cell phone or something, they could send you to jail for like a year for that. So
Wow, that's fucking crazy. That's
they
actually
keep stuff
really
under
crazy, man.
control.
That's absolutely
Um,
insane. Okay, yeah, wow. That made me just maybe just think about, yeah, yeah, very interesting. Very interesting because I mean, when I was there, I did feel like I enjoyed being there, but I did feel like what you said. I remember walking around. I think I went and got a gelato or some shit, and you said, "By the way, this place is a police state." And it's kind of weird. You're getting a gelato, and like you're thinking this place is a police state, and you're like, well, feels pretty normal. But yeah, it makes sense now what you said.
well, I mean, it is a police state, but so is America, and this is a different type of police state, Belarus. I don't think you would really, if as long as you're just you're not going out to actually harm people and steal from them or do anything hurt them, you will never have to worry about it. Where you get into the real authoritarian stuff is when you start to challenge the power structure, like a lot of these political dissidents are discovering the past few months, because journalists and political dissidents are being um, thrown in jail here right now. Spending 15 days, 30 days in jail. You know, you can look at it on some of these Belarusian websites like toot.by and stuff. Journalists, protesters, they are getting scooped up, tossed into vans, and being held for 2 weeks or 30 days, by the government here. But that's because, they're going after, they're challenging the power structure. Whereas, like, in the US, you can kind of, you can do that to some extent, unless you're like Julian Assange. If you get to that level where you're really messing with the power structure in the U.S., they're going to go after you hardcore. But you can mouth off about and protest about the U.S. government because they know that that's not really a big threat as long as most of the people are still just going along with their lives. They don't care about that. In the U.S., it's more like they've started criminalizing more and more stuff, victimless crimes and stuff in the U.S. where it's people who aren't necessarily meaning to do harm to anyone or cause any harm to society, and they're being incarcerated in the U.S. And its justification is that it harms the overall society, their behavior, even though it's not directly harming anybody. It may seem to be harming the overall society because you got to realize the United States, it's all about production and money there, and everything is about
Yeah, very,
production.
very hyper capitalist.
Yeah. And
Um,
I mean, people want to talk about this fear that's dripping towards socialism. Yeah, I mean, in some ways it is, but it's still, they want, to keep people on that grind,
on the
producing over
hamster on
there.
the wheel, and that's what. And I really shared a speaking. Now, I want to move into the end of the podcast, because we have been going for a bit, for almost an hour now. So we want to wrap up a few
Sure.
things. Um, so with so I guess there's so much more we have to discuss on another. I mean, so much more we could cover. But to finalize the topic we've discussed today, Steve, about the pandemic worldwide, whether you're in America, whether you're in Belarus, whether you're in Australia, wherever the fuck you are, right? We're moving into 2021 now. As someone who understood the human experience, traveled, understood how the way social structures work. What do you think the world is moving into coming into the new year?
I don't know if you want me to go totally off the deep end and say that we're moving towards some sort of totalitarian one world system, but There definitely appears to be in the works right now at the higher levels, um, a financial reset of sorts. Um, I don't know what is in the works as far as between the global powers like my country, the U.S. and China. There's supposedly China is now the largest economy in the world. So, basically superseding the U.S. economy would be like step down for the U.S. as a global superpower. Our military is obviously still predominant, but um, I don't think the elites want to engage in any major conflicts like have been in the past. I'm 100% sure they don't, because not because they value the lives of the soldiers so much and the average person in fighting for their country, but because they value their own wealth and power. Wars aren't good for the wealth and power of all of the elites. You know what I mean? So I think they're gonna have to do something though, because the national debts of a lot of the countries are out of control, especially my country. Going forward, they've got tremendous number of people out of work due to the pandemic in the United States. It's going to cause more social unrest, economic unrest, distrust in the system. The only thing they've been doing so far is giving out larger unemployment paychecks and stimulus checks to people in the United States, which is jacking up the federal debt even more. I mean, the United States debt load went from I think about 24 trillion this year to I think it's like almost 28 trillion now. I have to go check, but you can't add 3.5 trillion dollars in debt, every year to the U.S. budget, um, because they're not taking in the capital, pay it down, and at some point the entire monetary system becomes a joke, because you're spending these dollars that you think are worth the bread you're buying with these dollars, but um, it doesn't mean anything because the 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 value of the dollars has been
It's
devalued.
artificial. It's all artificial value.
Yes, by the faith in the country is the only thing holding it up, because they printed so much money and there's so much capital in the system that there's an overabundance of it, and they've shown that there isn't scarcity of money, so that lowers the value of the money. Um, Scarcity is what creates value. So
100%. Wherever there is less of something, there is more
yeah,
lucrative value to it. And whether that is exclusively in that context, Steve, or in many years to come, um, I guess that's duality, right? Abundance versus scarcity. We're told to have an abundant mindset, but yet we're told to value things that are scarce. See how that conundrum works?
well, yeah, that's just how the reality is. But I mean, I think that a lot of people in the United States, I think on some deep level, a lot of them, I mean, you have millions of people in the United States. I mean, high level accountants, financial people, lawyers. I mean, I used to go to university with some of these guys working for the big four accounting firms. It's like, how can you be an accountant with a master's degree in taxation working for KPMG or Goldman Sachs or something, one of the big banks, and not see that your entire system is built on false, like basically lies and propaganda, and just that it's going to collapse eventually if you keep going the same way you're going, because you'll end up in a situation like Venezuela where you completely devalue the currency. I mean, that's what they've chosen. I mean, that's what's going to happen. And when that happens, the people who have the least amount of the fiat currency are the ones who are going to suffer the most. And the global elites, I think they realize a lot of people are starting to understand this, and they know that they're going to have to do something to re-engineer the global economic system, whether it be through digital currency or, obviously the digital currency I do think they want to implement, because it gives them greater control and they can see where people are spending their money and where it's going, and they can tax people easier too. But they don't want to use like something that's hard to track, like Bitcoin or one of the other cryptos. They want to have their own cryptocurrency, their own currency,
Yeah,
issued
Ripple
by
went
the
through the roof.
issued by the national governments, that is under control. So I think that's in the works, some sort of financial system reset. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to implement it and what they're going to do in regards to the dynamics of it. Um, I don't know if that'll happen in 2021, but I think it's moving in that direction. They're trying to ease it in because they don't want to freak people out. There are a record number of people renouncing their U.S. citizenship in the last 6 months. A lot of people have been not only people have been getting out of the cities, people have been leaving the country. And I kind of saw this a lot like 4 or 5 years ago. And that's when I was kind of like really shopping around for countries to move to and started traveling a lot. And I kind of saw that the country was on a bad projection. Not that any country really is on a great projection right now. A lot of them aren't. But I just thought it'd be a place where I could live with a lower cost of living relative to my earnings, and that would allow me to live comfortable and kind of ride out the hard times, the storm that is coming. And that's why I set myself up over here.
Just to
Yeah.
finalize, man, to wrap up, honestly, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Definitely more topics that we didn't cover, that such as what we're just finishing off on, but that we could discuss in the future on this podcast. It's going to be a very interesting year for 2021. I think it'll be very interesting to see how this pandemic plays out and what will happen to the monetary system, which, what you mentioned at the end will be the big change. But yeah, well, thanks so much for being on the show, and we'll have you on again sometime in the future.